Well, today we're doing a little update on the Muller. As soon as I get finished shooting this last little clip, I'm going to go in and edit it and I'll upload it so you guys have got it for the weekend. I've got several little clips. I've shot a bunch of clips, but I haven't really compiled them. So they're just going to be a bunch of short little clips showing progress along the way. We're to the point where right now I'm welding up the chute on the bottom, or the door on the bottom. I still got to finish the latch mechanism and things like that, but for now I've got the little castings for bearings mounted on the Muller, and I've got the door tack welded together. So I'm going to finish tack welding it, and or finish welding it up, and then that's where I'm going to end it for right now. I'll pick it up. One thing I'm not happy with is the gearbox, and it's the one gear in there that I warped, and it's just not running as smooth as I think it should. What I've decided I'm going to do, and I've got the Muller upside down now, so everything's settled the other way, which shouldn't make any difference, but it does, and it's wanting to bind there in that position. So once I get the bottom door welded up and the latch mechanism all installed and everything, when I flip it back over, well, I'm going to check it. If it runs, I'm going to run it for a little bit. That way I can check and make sure the gear ratios are right and all that good stuff. I would suspect down the road I'm probably going to change that gear out and replace it with another one with a hub in it. And I think that'll alleviate that problem, but I've dinked around with it too much and I'm just not quite happy with it. So anyway, the Muller's closer. You know, we're once I get the door and the latch mechanism welded up, I still got to do my little do a little casting for a bearing cap, and probably cast me a pulley for the shiv on the bottom of the gearbox that goes from the motor to the gearbox, and then I've got to mount the motor and do the wiring and that type of thing. Then once it's back upright, set on a base, so we've got clearance and everything, it should be runnable, so we can find out if it's actually going to do what it's supposed to do. Alright, well, I got a gearbox that I got greased up like crazy, and I thought I'd show it to you before I put it together, hopefully for the final time. Got my gear reworked. That seems to be working fine. I ended up and installed an idler on the chain. With that half link, it was just a little bit too much, a little bit sloppy. Without it, why, it was just a little bit tight. Easiest thing is just to install an idler. So I think I changed heights on gears a little bit, and or on sprockets, and I think I've got everything aligned. Like I say, I'm going to give you a picture of it real quick here, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it together, and we'll show you once it's assembled, and hopefully we've got it right. Initially on this, I said I warped the sprocket, the big sprocket. If I would have left well enough alone, it, I think, would have been fine, but I saw a little bit of wobble in it when I first welded it up. I thought I can make that better by welding here and, you know, pulling it a little bit, and all I did was screw it up big time. So I've got my center hub in there. It's all bolted up. Everything looks pretty good there. I'm pretty happy with that. Got the chain on, got height set, got an idler sprocket on it that can float in there pretty well, so I think we'll hold alignment. And it's still wanting to run off on me just a little bit, but it's because I don't have the top half of the gearbox on there yet. So I think once I get it on there, it'll be fine. And everything looks pretty good. I greased the crap out of it. Like I say, we're going to assemble it, and hopefully this is the last time we're going to have to assemble it. So here's what it looks like. There's rotation going that way. Idler sprockets here. I just drilled into the case. The original one that Steve Chastain showed was a little short piece. I've extended the arm out a little bit, give it a little more moment. Don't know that it makes a bit of difference, but there it is. Let's put her together and see what it looks like. And now we have a gearbox that runs the way it's supposed to. So I'm going to go ahead, put the hubcaps on, bolt it together, get her finally assembled, and then we can move on from there. Finally. Glad to have that done. So now at least we got a gearbox that works the way it's supposed to. I'll finish tightening it up. I don't think there's anything else I'm going to have to do to it. So I'll button it up. Today's a casting day. I'm going to go ahead. I got a pattern made up for, well, I got two patterns made up. One was a 3D printed pattern for the little bearing carriers that are going to go on the front of the door for the Muller body, and the other one is the two pieces of aluminum angle that I'm going to cast to support the gearbox when we mount that. So I'm going to try and get those cast today. As soon as I get this gearbox bolted up, well, I'm going to go ahead and ram those molds. Alright, morning guys. I'm going to start the morning off with a real quick one that I found interesting. Yesterday was a casting day for me. I was casting the aluminum angle that's going to help support the Muller gearbox, and then I was casting the two little bearing supports, we're going to call, or supports for the through shaft that the Muller door is going to hinge on, the drop door. So, and I found it interesting the way they poured. They're both really simple patterns. A lot of times when I do patterns like this where they're one off, two off, something like that, they're not going to be a production item, and they're just something for applications like this where I only need two of them, you know, two of the angle supports and then two of these little bodies to, or these two little bearings. Why I use what I consider to be kind of a crowbar method, where, you know, you could do the same thing with a screwdriver and finesse it and everything. I tend to use a crowbar and just force these items through. So these were both done really crude, really fast, and there was a couple of things that came out of it that I found really interesting that I thought I would share with you. Now, this is the pattern for the bearing supports, and there's two of these. They're going to mount on the front of the Muller like this. There's going to be a 1-inch rod runs through them, and they're going to support that door, is what they're going to do. So the 1-inch rod's going to ride right on the inside. You know, eventually in 50 years they'll wear out and I'll have to replace them or something like that. But anyway, these were 3D printed patterns, and they were cast. I cast these pretty much as a 3D printed pattern. Now, it was so quick and dirty that when I drew them up in CAD, why I misdid my center line, so I had to add a piece on this end, and then on the other side I had to add a piece on this end to make them equal when I put them together, because I just printed out two of them of the same side, and when I put them together they were offset a little bit. So lined up the center and did it. Now, other than doing actually a couple of popsicle sticks glued onto the end, super glued on, and then running a little bit of body filler around them, and the two dowels I used for alignment pins, I sanded them off, and I did no work other than that. You know, these are rough as can be, and I expected to have quite a bit of fallout around the edges of them when I pulled them. So no surprises there. There again, back to the crowbar method. It's got, you know, it's got an edge here that's missing part of the 3D print when I sanded it, and this edge is rough on a 3D print. Unless they work well if you finish them out. If you try and cast them as printed, unless you're using an ultrafine setting and everything's just tuned right, why, they're rough. You know, they're just rough. They'll grab sand and pull and everything, and I didn't expect anything different from that. So there's no surprises in the way either of these cast. The two angles were cast off of a piece of wood. You know, I've got some filler in the edges. I glued these together and stapled them with my narrow crown stapler, and then went back and hit them with some body filler. This one one of these pieces had a big cutout in it, so I filled it with filler, and I sanded it to the extent of 80 grit. You know, I had a piece of 80 grit that I sanded it down with. That's as far as I went. There's no finish on it whatsoever, so there again, I expect a rough finish. I expect tear out with them and everything. So there's no surprises in that. What is surprising is the way they cast and the way they poured and what the finished castings came out with. Now, when I used this as a split pattern, started out with this down in the flask, and I used my old junk flasks that I've used for 100 years and burned up. They're not my nice, they don't have my nice alignment pins and stuff, so, which didn't matter for these. I just wanted a fairly small flask that I could do, because I only made one set of these, so I had to ram up 2 molds with this, and then 2 molds with the angle. So started out down like this, rammed it, flipped it, put them back together, parting compound. When I fed these, I fed off of this end going in, and I dropped a sprue down here and ran directly into it. On the other side, came out with two points that connected and went to one riser. You know, quick and dirty, crowbar method. So the way they came out is, and they both came out virtually the same. My sand I felt was a little dry, although it rammed good, and it's probably just about right. Got a little bit of shrinkage right here. When I poured in here, filled them, and there again, rough gating, rough runners, the whole 9 yards. A little bit of tear out on them, and they're both, you know, about the same. This one's a little bit better, but they both shrank right here on both of these cavities, being cast just like that. So we talk about the wetness of our sand, the quality of our sand, how fine it is, and all that. And that makes a difference, but it also makes a difference how we ram them up or how we pour. So that's, there again, one-off things, or two of these, they're going to work fine. I'm not going to worry about it. I can move on to machining them, and I'd spend a little bit of extra time machining than if they were a production pattern. I wanted to come out with as close to being finished as I can make them, because time is money, of course. So that's the way they came out, and finish is okay. You know, it's a little bit rough on them on top. Nothing spectacular, but I didn't do anything spectacular with them. So the angle, and I cast these all in the same session, it was cast in this orientation right here with the V down, is the way I cast it. And there again, not finished. When I rammed it up in a mold, here's one of the mold halves. There's just barely room. You got about 3/4 of an inch on either end. Is about all you've got. So kind of concerned me that I was going to have enough room to ram them up, but but they both rammed fine, and you got where you're ramming them. So you start ramming them. This goes in your drag in the bottom. Ram the bottom up, flip them up, and do this. Now, I fed it off of one side, 2 feeders going in. If you look at the profile, it's undercut quite a bit here. So when you ram your sand, it comes out to about the top of this edge here. I should have probably coped this down here. I did not do that. So I went ahead, just dusted it off as smooth as I could by hand, and rammed the top half. Sprue going in one side, and runner across, 2 feeders going in. And I widened out the feeders so they were fairly wide on these. When I got to the other side, why, of course you're going to get tear out if you don't cope them down. So what I ended up and did is I just dug a runner, or basically everything that was in the way there, I cut out of this side here, on both sides basically, and then I vented the crap out of it in where I'd cut away, and I vented it heavy. I think I put about a dozen vent lines in it. So the way they came out is just like this. Finish on them's not bad. This one's where I just busted the sprue and the risers off of these, so I've got where I whacked it on the piece of metal. I got a couple of little divots there on the bottom, but there's the finish I got. I'm not unhappy with that at all. A little bit of tear out in both ends where there's very little draft on the ends. But this is where I vented it all the way along this side. Now you see virtually no shrinking that's really visible. If you look at it, there's just a little bit of shrinkage out here on these ends, on all 4 ends, which I can cut off a 1/2 of an inch on each side and have the proper length. These are long enough. But anyway, that just goes to show that where it's poured like that, fed in through this side, and you can see a couple of little heat marks going in where the runners, or where the sprues fed it. But other than that, you didn't get the gas catching in the top any place to shrink down, or the steam to cause a shrink cavity in there. You know, like I say, you got a little bit of shrinkage on each end on both of these castings, and that's hardly noticeable at all. So if you can cast them that way, all your gases are going to your high points, and gases or steams. So I'll machine those off, and those are going to work real well. So I don't know if you're going to find that useful. I found it very interesting because it looked like these were much improved castings over the little bearings that showed the shrink cavities. So just something to consider when you're setting up your patterns, ramming them and everything. So anyway, that's what we got for you for little interesting tips of the day. All right, very quickly this morning, a little bit of handheld action. These are the angles that mount the gearbox to the channel iron on the bottom of the Muller. They're all machined out and ready to go. I could, you know, do a little bit more. We machined a little bit of a lip right here on the back edge of both of them, just so that it sits down flat. I could have planed the surfaces on the top of this gearbox just a little bit wider. Here would have made it so I didn't need that little lip. But anyway, they're ready to be mounted. And then here's the rough cutouts, or the rough machining so far of the two little bearings that are going to run the door. I still got to align them and bore the centers, but we'll get that far here in a bit. So anyway, gearbox is about ready to be mounted up. That's the next thing we're going to do. Muller upside down. I've got our brackets welded on to mount our gearbox on. I still had to drill the 4 holes for them to bolt up to, but I'm not going to worry about that quite yet. That's going to be the next project, I think. This is going to be our swing out door, but once we get the hinges done, it'll flop out. So I just got it tack welded together, and we'll get that done. But I thought I'd show you the way the gearbox sets up here. I've already got my 2 pieces of angle aluminum mounted to it loosely. They're kind of centered up in the slots, and there'll be a little bit of things are kind of cattywampus here. They're not 100% true to the world, and that's just because of this old drum and the way this was all put together originally. So there's adjustment in it. We'll work around that. But let me go ahead and see if I can't get this lifted up here. And this is our aluminum angles mounted, and this is going to sit right up here. Just about there, I believe, is where we're going to bolt up, maybe a little bit farther back. And as we go along, I fitted this up. Don't have a tape measure out here. I think center to center distance on these was about 19 and a half, 19 and 3/8, something like that is what he'd figured it out to be. Mine's a little bit closer. I think I'm down to about 17 and a half, 18 and a half. Let me grab a tape measure. And the reality is I'll go ahead and initially fit my chain before I actually drill this to bolt it up, because if I need to move it out, I can. But I've got a 17 and a half inch center to center distance, which is quite a bit shorter, but as long as it doesn't really bind on the pulleys, or on the sprockets, I'm not going to worry about it. I'd rather have it tucked in a little bit tighter. The advantage to mounting it on the side, one of the advantages I think, is I can put a little shelf here. I'll just make a little removable tray that either screws in place with a couple of screws or bolts or something, just to give me a little bit of a shelf. I can go probably about a foot, 10 inches or a foot. Actually, we'll probably come out about a foot, so we're at least to the edge of this, edge of the gearbox, which from here is going to be about probably 14 inches. If you go in the center, it's going to be about 10 and a half, something like that, just to cover the gearbox, so it's basically protected from that respect. Drive pulley will go off of here to our motor, or our motor will mount here. Go to the drive pulley, do our gear reduction, and then we've got our number 50 chain that runs. I'm going to go ahead and set up that 50 chain and see how our distance looks center to center and all that stuff before I drill it. Motor will mount kind of underneath here, bottom up. Now I'm going to put some probably 4x6s on the bottom of this, run across 2. I plan on putting feet and then 4x6s. One of the concerns I had, and I think it is probably going to be a concern, I'm probably going to have to address it. I think I'm probably going to have to extend these legs at least a couple of inches. If we figure where our sprocket's going to go, actually it's going to have to run a little bit below our sprockets here. So we're going to have to be, yeah, see, I think our motor's about 18 inches tall, and we've only got about 16 inches to the legs. So adding 3.5 inches with a 4x6 underneath, straddled 2 of the legs, would help and probably be enough, but we may go a little bit higher than that, just so that we make sure we've got a little airflow over the fans for the motor, so hopefully it doesn't suck up any dirt or crap, that's sand that's on the ground, and early on destroy our motor again. So anyway, that's where we're at. Looks pretty good to me. I'm pretty happy with it. A little bit of alignment, as I said, with being cattywampus, this side of the box has got to come up about like that probably, which is fine. There's lots of adjustment for that. Alright, here's our last little update on the Muller. This is where we're at right now. We've got our main gear and our sprocket mounted there, and that's ready to go. I'm happy with the way that's going to set up, and we'll have it disassembled and then have to realign everything, but that looks pretty good. Got the bearings mounted here. We've got our door. A little hot from tack welding together yet. This is our drop door out the bottom. It'll drop out. Like I say, we'll smooth everything up. Got a final weld that I'm going to do that. And then we're going to call it good for the day. We've got to figure out our little pieces of angle iron to come out here and our crossbar that locks it in position. I'll have to add a couple little tabs here, I think, to do the adjustment for how tight the door is. But other than that, why we're getting awful close. Have to do something for our little bearing retainer down here, or our seal retainer on the bottom probably. And then I think we probably have to extend our legs just a little bit, figure out a motor mount, which will be a cross brace across here, I believe, and then we'll mount our motor right here. I'll have to watch so that it's going to be, I don't know exactly how it's going to mount. We've got to figure that out. We may do something different because I'm going to want my pulley out far enough to where it's not going to foul our chain here. So we'll have to figure that. Pulley's going to go here, and in that respect, this could have probably been just a little bit longer, but it'll be fine. So we got to figure out our motor mount on there, and then we'll flip it back over, see how well it's going to run. Anyway, this is just a conglomerate of a bunch of short little clips. Hopefully you find them useful, interesting. Comments, suggestions, leave them in the comment section for me below. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, I'd appreciate it. And as always, have a good weekend, and thanks for taking the time to watch.